Hey everyone, what's up? This is going to be the first chapter that's focused primarily on bet sizing. Thought a lot about how to make this chapter and did it and read it a little bit, but I think the main idea that I want to talk about is rather than kind of chronological history with regards to bet sizing. We'll have a bit of that, but more kind of player development history, like how your approach to bet sizing should change as you develop as a player. And then we're going to keep that in mind whenever we see someone like where are they in the player development scheme of things and how we can use this. And we're going to look at a few examples. So I want to start out with what do you really know about bet sizing? Here you can divide players into a few different types. Some guys don't really know much about bet sizing. So they will wing a bet sizing on a flop, maybe make it bigger if the board is wetter and smaller if it's drier. And then each one with his own thought process. But yeah, we're not really talking about those guys. I'm sure a lot of you guys are those guys, and we'll talk about that in kind of theory of development. But on a more kind of abstract level, a lot of people know the way that they approach bet sizing, whether it's bets like what's the optimal bet sizing, or they have some simplifications, or they have some heuristics that they use like the players I just described. But in my eyes, they're not really aware of kind of the world that they're entering when they enter the world of trying to exploit bet sizes. And kind of at the first level, before we look at how you can use bet sizes to exploit people strategically, we're going to talk about how you can read bet sizes. So this is going to be more of a exploit people by seeing their bet size and learning something from that. And to do that, we really need to develop kind of like a bet sizing HUD in our brain. Because if you think about it, we talked about pre-flop frequencies, and we said if I know how you respond to a 3-bet, I'm going to change my 3-bet range. If I know how you respond to a 4-bet, I'm going to change my 4-bet range. And if I know that you construct your range in a linear way or a polar way, or you size too big or you size too small, all of these things change my strategy. So similarly, if I know how you approach bet sizing, if I manage to figure it out, there are many deep levels of stuff I can do. There's tons of stuff we can do. So I'll try to go through my theory of how players from when they learn poker to down the line develop their bet sizes, how we'd want to recognize and play against each one of those players. Lots and lots of examples. These are actually fun examples where we can find them. And then later down the line, we'll look at how we can use our own bet sizes as exploits, or how we can do kind of more nuanced stuff. Okay. So kind of level 1, I call this I know nothing. My best example for this was one of the first time, I think maybe the first time I ever played poker in a casino. I'd never played online poker. I was a huge fish, obviously. And I had queens on some low board, and I just bet really small flop, really small turn, and checked the river, and it got checked down, and I won against something. And the guy told me, why did you bet so small? You let me draw really cheap, because he saw queens, which was an overpair, a really strong hand. And my only answer, in my brain, I knew what I was thinking. I saw all those low cards. I imagined all the 2 pairs and sets that could beat me, and I was just scared, right? So the only reason for my bet sizing was the fact that, as a personality, I was a bit cautious. And I had no clue really ranges or what's going on or anything, so I was just clicking buttons. This is, I think, how most people start. They're not able to hand read in any way, so they don't understand their relative hand strength. They don't know how ranges narrow in relation to bets and pot size and positions, all this stuff there. They're just really in the dark. And then different people will approach this in different ways, but the main thing is that you don't get much information from seeing what they're doing, and also you, as the player playing against them, who do understand all these things, are responsible for the size of the pot. So this is kind of the first player type that we're going to discuss more in depth. We'll look at how big do you want the pot, and in what order do you want bets to go on with different hand types, because when you play against one of these players, you're in charge of that. And when I mean one of these players, it doesn't have to be exactly this player. It could also just be a very passive player who doesn't put much money in, like Phil Hellmuth, for example, who's like check call. Check call is not putting pressure on, and you get to determine the amount and the order that bets go in against a guy like this. So this is the first level of bet sizing theory. Kind of next level, once you understand a bit more, is I'll size for my hand. You look at your hand and you look at the board and you pick a bet sizing that you think is appropriate. And very often, as your hand gets stronger and stronger, the bet size will get bigger and bigger, especially if the board is wet. And as your hand gets weaker, or if it's a bluff, the bet size will get smaller. Players who play like this often haven't thought out a strategy in advance. Very common for beginners and recreationals, or people who play multiple different games. So they look at their hand, they look at the board, they're like, okay, what makes sense here? Is the board, A7 deuce, very rainbow, very dry? Maybe you size small with a set to keep the other guy in. But if the board is 10-9-8 and you have something strong, you're gonna bomb. And if the board is 10-9-8 and you're just bluffing with king queen, you're gonna size something medium. Very kind of bet size equals hand strength type of strategy. Okay. We'll give examples of all of these on the board soon, so you guys will get the picture. So third type, I call it I'll size for your hand. This is actually a lot of low to mid stakes players, because this is a good way to approach those stakes. So the idea is that you try to put your opponent on a hand and try to size for that hand. So for example, maybe your opponent called 2 bets, you're on the river, and it came some overcard, and you're like, and you have a bluff, and you think, okay, how big do I need to bet to make him fold top pair? Or maybe same situation, you're on the river, you have a value bet, but it came an overcard, and then you size and you're, okay, how small do I need to size in order to keep him in with top pair, right? So opposite. And these I'll size for your hand types, or this kind of bet sizing strategy, I think is very common as a developmental strategy as you're moving up stakes. It's a very important strategy to have and master, but also obviously to recognize when other people happen to use this against you, because as we're going to see, if we recognize someone's bet sizing strategy, we can often deduce their hand type from the bet size, and then it's game over. So fourth type, and this is higher stakes guys or guys who are deeper into theory, they do what I call I'll size for my range. So rather than look at their hand, they look at the situation and they think, okay, which sizing would benefit my range here? By range, what I mean is the entire group of hands they get to in a situation. So, board like before, when we reach the river and it comes an overcard, they might think, okay, how strong does my hand need to be to value bet? What's the optimal bet sizing for the group of hands that I'm value betting, and that's the size I'll use. Whether I'm value betting or bluffing, always the same size, and it's always going to fit my range. Now, what this does, and the reason you see this more at higher stakes, is this disguises your hand a lot more, so it's a lot more difficult to figure out which hand you have, although it is still, as we're going to see, very possible in some instances. And yeah, I added kind of the fifth level for fun. I call this I can see the matrix, because I think, it's tough to tell if someone is at this level, but this guy is actually aware of all the different levels, and maybe he's aware of how his opponent perceives him, and then he starts, I'll say, doing manipulative stuff. So he's not sizing for his range, and he's not sizing for his hand. He's actually sizing for his opponent in a way. Right? Kind of giving off, figuring out which level your opponent is at in terms of reading and reacting to bet sizes, and then being one level above that. And this is easier than it seems. When I started poker, and the entire idea of GTO in poker and of balance in poker is to avoid leveling games. Because you never know, if you think about rock, paper, scissors as a leveling game, Someone threw scissors. What are they gonna, and they won. Are they gonna throw scissors again because they just won, or will they switch because that's obvious, or will they not switch because it's obvious? It's obvious, kind of like this. This is called a leveling game. And the idea with the leveling game is if you recognize your opponent's level and you go one above, then you win. But if you misrecognize and you go two above, you lose. So a lot of people don't like to play leveling games. But the nice thing about bet sizing is that most people don't even understand that they're playing a game with their bet sizing. They just do whatever, whichever one of the levels they're on. So being one level above them is actually not difficult because if we're making a metaphor, imagine you're playing rock, paper, scissors against someone who doesn't realize that he's playing rock, paper, scissors. And he has his strategy. You watch him for a while, you can tell what it is. You start adjusting, and he's never, ever, ever going to realize anything is going on. He's not even going to react to you on this kind of sphere of the game because he's not aware it exists. He'll always react on other levels of the game. I want to quickly give examples of all of these in an actual hand, like how might these players size as the hand plays out, so that we know we're on the same page, and then we'll start talking about kind of how to recognize and how to exploit each of these player types. Don't mind the actual solver strategy, we're just using this as a reference so we see the board and we can talk about bet sizes. So we don't even care that the sim even run in this instance. Okay, so 10-9-8, two-tone, I know nothing guy will tend to bet sizes that are inappropriate for the board, so he might bet one big blind, or two big blinds with very random assortment of hands, and then kind of keep with the small sizing scheme for future streets. He might, pot, but do it with fives, or do it with, like some of the I know nothing guys we call them pot fish, they keep potting. Maybe they have pot, that's their favorite button, but very random, and the way to recognize this is very often at showdown. You'll see the hand, you'll remember the bet sizing, you'll be like, okay, this guy is just button clicking, he has no clue what he's doing. There's no rhyme or reason to, say have king 8, you go half pot check. Of course, we want to know he did that, but it's not, it's kind of the I know nothing guy. Now, let's say you're the I'll size for my hand type of guy, and we're on the flop. Naturally, you will size bigger when your hand is better. Okay, so let's say you decide that you want to bet something like King 10. King 10 is a rather medium strength-ish hand here, so you might bet half pot. But if you have a set or a straight or something like that, in pocket jacks, we'll start betting 75% pot or something like that, maybe even over bet. So you're just sizing for the strength of your hand. Next, we'll go, I'll size for my range. These players will look at this board, they'll be like, okay, I have my full range, what's a good size to use? Maybe it's 60% pot, and then any hand they bet will go into that notch. I think I missed I'll size for your hand. So I'll size for your hand, guys. On the flop, they have a good hand, they will still size big, just like the I'll size for my hand guys. Because the board's so connected, they realize you can continue with tons of stuff, so they will size big in that instance, but maybe when they're bluffing, they'll size small, because they'll be like, I want you to call wide, or, I'm only getting you to fold like ace-5 type of hands anyway. Or maybe they even will just not ever bluff at this kind of board. I can see the metrics, like I said. We're not going to get there for a while, but if we look at this board and we go, let's say we got to the river somehow. And river is now a 7. So 7's a kind of cool card in this instance to think about sizing. And again, the I know nothing guy, sizing will be random, and also his bet sizing threshold will tend to be random. Like he might bet kings, he might bet 8-9, he might bet many hands that are an inappropriate hand strength to bet, not realizing what they're worth. I'll size for my hand guy. If he has a straight or better, he'll just bet very big, because straight's a very big hand. So he might bet on the river with something like King Jack, just very, very big bet, like pot the river with King Jack. Now, if you ask the solver will not want you to bet very big with King Jack, generally. Sometimes we'll get to that, but generally not, with the reason being that you want your opponent to call with worse, and of course this sim isn't accurate, but as his range narrows and narrows and you bet bigger, his range narrows, at some point, he's just chopping with you when he calls, so you want to size down for value. So it doesn't make sense, but you will see these players do that. And again, it's very easy to recognize I'll size for my hand player, because this is the guy who will flop top set and start bombing at you, not really thinking about your calling range or anything like that. Or here, just bomb with a jack. I'll size for your hand here, would get to the river and think, okay, you have tons of straights and two pairs and stuff like that. Let's say he has queen jack. Queen jack, he would shove. Because he would be like, okay, he'll never fold a straight with a jack, so let's get max value. If he has one jack, he wants you to call with worse, so he might go half pot or 1/3 pot, but definitely not anything big. If he's bluffing, he will go bigger than a jack, but smaller than queen jack, because he wants you to fold, so maybe he will go 75% pot and think, okay, what's enough to get you to fold your two pairs and stuff, 80% pot or something. And that will be the bluff size, but never the jack X value size. I'll size for my range, I'll size more like the solver. So queen jack would shove, but he'd also shove bluffs and think about which bluffs, and maybe some of those bluffs actually have a jack. Not sure. Here not, but this one hasn't run yet. And yeah, he'll have some smaller size for jack X plus bluffs, some bigger size for queen jack and appropriate bluffs, but both like trying to be balanced. Maybe this is a good example to talk about the I can see the matrix guy. If he knows who you are, maybe he realizes that if he shoves, you will fold a jack, so he will shove as a bluff. Or like he will realize if you're the guy who calls the jack or folds the jack against the shove, for example, and use it more to his advantage in that sense. I think that's reasonable example. We'll go more in depth later. So again, we want to learn how to recognize how to play against each of these guys and how to exploit each of these guys to the best of our ability to maximize our win rate. And we'll start with I Know Nothing in the next chapter.